There are times in Earth's history when evolution produces many innovations in a short amount of time. The forces of natural selection cause lineages to split into many different branches, each with different traits. At the same time, the environment can put the same stresses on these different branches, causing them to independently evolve the same new features. This creates a web of divergence and convergence, but only the lineages with the best combinations of traits will last. The Middle Permian was one of these times. 50 million years before the dinosaurs, large, fully terrestrial land animals had only recently evolved. These early relatives of mammals and reptiles ruled the land for tens of millions of years, but this period of primitive ecological stability did not last long, and as life on land entered its adolescence, a myriad of new lineages would appear in quick succession, only the most successful of which would survive beyond the Permian. As a result, many of the traits we see in today's mammals and reptiles date back to the turmoil of the Middle Permian. Towards the end of the early Permian, things were finally changing in the land of the sailbacks. Many of the characteristic early Permian genera had died out, and primitive tetrapods were hit especially hard. Diadectid reptiliomorphs, the first large land herbivores on Earth, had diminished in presence. Meanwhile, sauropsid herbivores, including parareptiles like the bolosaurids and herbivorous captorinids like Labidosauricos, were becoming a major part of the fauna. As the years went on, more ancient groups vanished. Ophiachodontids disappeared, and the herbivorous Edaphosaurids were on their way out, replaced by the Casiid synapsids as the largest land herbivores. At 20 feet long, Casiids like Catylorhynchus grew well beyond the size of any land animal before them. A few million years from the end of the early Permian epoch, only a few tetrapods from the beginning of the Permian remained. The Casiids continued to flourish, and the Varanophids remained common medium-sized predators. Large carnivorous sphenacodontians, including sailbacks like Dimetrodon, had also survived, but soon a new group of sphenacodontians would replace not only these sailbacks, but nearly all of the primitive early Permian tetrapods that remained. Right at the boundary between the early Permian and Middle Permian epochs around 273 million years ago, the tetrapod fossil record goes nearly blank. Recent evidence suggests an extinction event of unknown origin was the likely cause of this gap, affecting not just tetrapods, but all kinds of plants and animals, a sign of things to come later in the Permian. Afterwards, the new Middle Permian ecosystems were dominated by the new group of sphenacodontians, the Therapsids. Only a few million years into the Middle Permian, and the Therapsids already included herbivores and carnivores of many shapes and sizes. Some of them, like Biarmasuchus, still somewhat resembled their sphenacodontian ancestors. It was a common predator in Russia around this time, but it lived in the shadow of its larger relative Eotitanosuchus. The true success story of the Middle Permian was a more advanced group, Dinocephalia. They included medium-sized predators like Archaeocyanodon, but many of them had already left behind their carnivorous origins and filled the role of large land herbivores. Many of these herbivores, like Estomanasuchus, had skulls covered in bony projections. This was a common trend in Therapsid evolution, especially among the Dinocephalians, possibly for the purposes of sexual display or species identification. Other Dinocephalian herbivores, the Tepanocephalians, evolved reinforced skulls, possibly for butting heads. But Dinocephalians were not the only herbivorous therapsids around Russia at this time. Aucheria, known only from a single skull, is a member of a different group, Anomodontia. The Anomodonts included many small herbivores and insectivores, and they were most common in southern Africa. One South African genus, Eodicynodon, represents the earliest known example of the most successful anomodont group, Dicynodontia. named for their two large canine teeth and an otherwise toothless beak. Rounding out the fauna was a group of advanced therapsid carnivores, eutheriodonts like the Theracophalian Glannosuchus. While some of the eutheriodonts' specialized features may seem to indicate relationships with other therapsids, natural selection was pushing many of the therapsid lineages to evolve these same features convergently. This much directional evolution in such a short time makes it hard to say which of these features unite groups of shared ancestry and which features evolved multiple times due to the strong selective pressure to evolve them. Regardless, a major trend in therapsid evolution is a tendency towards warm-bloodedness. Many lines of evidence point to this change taking place. They had specialized teeth that would have allowed for food to be pre-processed before digestion, presumably allowing them to fuel a quicker metabolism. This quicker metabolism required more food to stay alive, and this is reflected in their ecology. Compared to a cold-blooded fauna, a warm-blooded fauna has fewer predators, since it takes more herbivores to feed each individual carnivore. Unlike in the early Permian, we see this pattern in the herbivore-to-carnivore ratio of middle Permian land animals. A quick metabolism is costly, but it allows an animal to produce its own heat rather than deriving it from the outside world, which itself has a number of advantages, from being able to survive in polar regions to being more active during the cold nights. These early therapsids were probably not on the same metabolic level as a modern mammal or bird, but this metabolic advantage was selected for heavily enough that it helped them to conquer the land in a span of what seemed to be only a few million years. Perhaps because of this increase in metabolism and activity levels, multiple lineages of therapsid tended to evolve a more upright stance over time. This stance change may have also been a driver of a major change in their sense of hearing. Today, most land vertebrates have eardrums that can transmit high-pitched airborne sound to the stapes. But ancestrally, most tetrapods could only detect sound by picking up vibrations through their jaw from the ground. For an animal whose head rested on the ground, this worked well enough, but a more upright stance meant that sound had to be picked up more easily from the air. This ability had already evolved separately in several Permian lineages, including at least some therapsids, which probably had an external eardrum on the surface of the lower jaw. In many therapsids, the lower jaw itself was changing. The eutheriodonts evolved a large dentary bone, with the other bones of the jaw becoming reduced. Meanwhile, the dicynodonts were experiencing the opposite trend. Over the next few million years, the rapid change of the Middle Permian would continue, and more extreme creatures would take the reins. Biarmasuchians produced carnivores with more skull ornamentation, a trait normally seen in herbivores. Eutheriodonts persisted, and a similar group of carnivores, the Gorgonopsians, appeared around this time. The earliest known Gorgonopsians came in the form of small predators like Eryphostoma, but their wide gape, large canine teeth, and other specializations would ensure that they would expand beyond this niche in the near future. The top predators were a new assemblage of large Dinocephalians. Large Antiosaurids and Titanosuchids ruled, from Russia to Africa and even to the islands of China. These creatures were the largest known land predators of the Permian, growing 20 feet in length with skulls nearly 3 feet long. Other Dinocephalians held on to the large herbivore niche, with enormous tapinocephalids roaming the land. The Anomodonts were present in many different forms, from slender insectivores to stout browsers, but it was the Dicynodonts that were the most speciose. Herbivorous Captorhinids and the newly evolved Pariasaurs were dominant sauropsid herbivores, holding their own against the therapsids. In the undergrowth were newer groups of insectivorous parareptiles, as well as the surviving Captorhinids. Although most sauropsids remained short, stout, and sluggish, the diapsids had been pursuing a different path for almost 50 million years, evolving a light skull, a quick bite, and longer legs, making them swift hunters of insects and other small animals. By the Middle Permian, they were only beginning to diversify into different forms. One of these lineages would lead to Sauria, the group containing lizards, snakes, crocodiles, and almost all other reptiles from the Permian onwards. But as often happens in evolution, some diapsids reversed this trend towards a more slender form. Early relatives of turtles, which are either within Saria or are close relatives, were evolving back in the opposite direction, growing robust bodies and wide ribs that would one day become the basis of the shell, and covering the characteristic diapsid openings in the skull for reinforcement. After another few million years, the fauna would face another major extinction before the end of the Middle Permian. The Dinocephalians would suddenly go extinct, along with many other organisms. As the Middle Permian wound down, the later Permian fauna would begin to take shape. The Pariasaurs would go on to become the largest land herbivores, and the Dicynodonts would flourish alongside them. The ornamented Biarmasuchians would diversify, filling some of the predator niches, as would early saurians. Therocephalian eutheriodonts would become more common, but the Gorgonopsians would be quick to surpass them in size, becoming the dominant predators of the late Permian. In the meantime, one group of eutheriodonts, Cynodontia, would accumulate more and more new features. Like some of their Therocephalian relatives, they develop a secondary palate that would reinforce the skull and extend the nasal passageway to the back of the throat, presumably so they could still breathe while their mouth was full of food being chewed. Their cheek teeth would specialize into what we now call molars, which aid the chewing process itself. Meanwhile, their reduced jawbones were in the perfect position to become bones of the middle ear, which will allow them to hear a wide range of frequencies with clarity. If these adaptations sound familiar, it is because Cynodontia was the group that would one day lead to mammals. Many of our mammalian features, both subtle details and groundbreaking abilities, come from individual adaptations accumulated during this tumultuous time, long before the age of dinosaurs. While other groups would overshadow the cynodonts and the diapsid reptiles for many millions of years to come, these two lineages would outlast them all, thanks to the unique combinations of characteristics they ended up with during this chaotic period of evolution.